With the recent watching of the Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials and realizing just how far a franchise like Doctor Who has fallen, I've just started to wonder about all these franchises that have had bad turns happen to them. Doctor Who, Star Trek, and Star Wars are the big ones. There's a group of people that seem to think that if the right people get in charge of these franchises again, that they can somehow retcon a fix in place. And I look at these franchises and I'm like, well, how do you do that? So, like with Doctor Who, I was watching a video on YouTube today, and somebody was talking about the Velyard and how the Velyard might be a way to save Doctor Who. Their speculation was that Ncuti Gatwa regenerates into the Velyard, or is the Velyard currently, and that would be a bad regeneration path that you could say, well, starting with David Tennant forward, we could restart the Doctor Who series and try to pick up where things went wrong. There have been rumors about the Velyard. I mean, personally, given this set of people running the stuff now and how they're doing things, I would anticipate they would make David Tennant the Velyard, not Ncuti Gatwa, because David Tennant is the busted regeneration where all the negativity is focused into. But even if you did do it the Ncuti way, is that really fixing Doctor Who? You still have that material. I mean, a lot of people like the Matt Smith and the Peter Capaldi stuff. So if you just erase that material, I think that's going to irritate a lot of people. So I don't see how that fixes anything. Or if you retcon the Timeless Children and you say, well, that was just the Master doing some sort of psychological deception on the Doctor so that the Doctor thought that the Timeless Children was for real along with the Flux. But does that really fix anything? And then you go back to like the next generation of Star Trek. You could easily say that if you just get rid of Discovery and Strange New Worlds, and I guess even Picard, and you stick that into its own little private, I don't know, alternate timeline or whatever you want to do. But then what do you do? Because I would argue, I think the Star Trek Next Generation brand, the movies that came out in the 90s, I personally think is where things went wrong. So what, do you erase those too? I just think that these franchises are beyond repair. You look at Star Wars. You look at what they're doing with not only the sequel movies that they did with Rey, but you look at The Mandalorian, which had a window where they might have been able to maybe not fix, but kind of just ignore some stuff and just kind of represent what Star Wars might have been or what, back in the day. But then that final season of The Mandalorian, there's no fixing that. So I guess for me, what I'm saying is, why are people so circling around these franchises that they themselves are circling the drain? And instead, why aren't they either embracing new franchises or, and this is the preference that I would have, starting up their own franchises, the more creative people who are not happy with what Hollywood is doing? And I guess what I'm wondering is, in this day and age of cell phone cameras being reasonable enough to film stuff on, and I use film in the old school way because recording stuff doesn't sound as awesome as filming, why aren't there more creatives out there making alternative franchises? There's clearly a hunger for it. Even something like the Orville, which was a knockoff of the Next Generation era Star Trek, that caused a great fan base to build from something like that. And what I'm saying is, I don't think that we can count on stuff like the Orville anymore because I believe Disney owns them now. And if the Orville does get another season, just imagine the type of season with Disney making decisions on that series. So I'm just wondering, why aren't we seeing a burst of creative endeavors to start new grassroots franchises?
To address your first question, like, why are people clinging to these old franchises like Star Trek, Star Wars, and Doctor Who? I think that there are a lot of people who have incorporated these franchises into themselves as part of their identity. So when you try to strip that away, you're taking a piece of them. And I mean, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, that they've done that's, part of them. But I know for a lot of these people, you hear them talking about how this franchise saw them through a very dark time in their life, or they sat there and they watched this franchise with their brother who's now dead. And this meant something to them. They don't want to give that up easily. And it's probably very painful to see these people who were supposed to be caretakers of these franchises. Because again, you come in and you take over something that's a long-established, long-running show like Star Trek or Doctor Who. You're messing in somebody else's sandbox. And for whatever reason, these people, they think they have the right to come in and kick over the sandcastle that was already there and then just take a piss on it.
I'm not necessarily saying that you have to throw your DVD collection away of stuff you used to like. What I'm asking is these franchises are completely broken. Whatever you were getting out of that you have the DVDs and those fond memories of, it's gone as far as any new episodes of these things.
My advice to people who have that attachment to these shows or to these movie franchises would be to, like you said, you've got your DVDs or your Blu-rays or whatever, to hold on to those, keep enjoying what you had there, and mourn the death of the franchise like you would if you lost a friend. Because essentially that's what's happened. The franchise is dead. At least the franchise that you knew is gone. And unfortunately, I don't think there is any coming back from where these franchises have gone as far as what they've done to the stories and the universes. So take some time to mourn, but you also need to move on after that. And that means looking for something new.
And I realize that right now, I don't think Hollywood is going to give us an alternative. The thing that happened with the Orville, that was a once-in-a-generation type setup. So I'm not looking for Hollywood to give me that alternative franchise that channels a lot of the things I used to get out of Star Trek or Star Wars or Doctor Who. But what I'm asking, and I guess it confuses me a bit, because when I was younger, there were friends that I had that during the summer, I had a friend that would have a big, bulky VHS camera and would film scripted stuff in his parents' garage and in the backyard. And we did see in the 2000 teens, there was quite this explosion of fan films of Star Trek, Star Wars. I think you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, even Harry Potter had a few fan films going on.
Oh, yeah, and I've seen a few Doctor Who's as well.
There was that Futurama fan film.
Yeah, that one was pretty good.
And I'm not saying those are bad. I mean, Star Trek Continues is one of my favorite fan film series of all times. Mm-hmm. But then CBS, after the whole Axanar setup, they put such limitations on fan films that outside of just a one-off, or I think it's, you could have two connected narratives no longer than 15 minutes each. And that's not going to give me what I'm looking for. So I guess what I'm saying here, and this is kind of just me learning about this whole process, I think fan films are great when you're learning your trade. So you want to learn how to write scripts or to light a scene or to set up audio. But what I'm wondering is, why don't these fan film productions ever turn in to creating their own independent grassroots type thing?
Some of them have. However, I think that most of them are just still Star Trek for the most part that I've seen, with the serial numbers filed off.
Well, Renegades is the big example there, where they tried to film that pilot for a new series, presented it to CBS. CBS turned it down. And so what they did is they scraped off the serial numbers and made a second installment that was not Star Trek. It was just called Renegades, not Star Trek Renegades. And we've seen a few independent things. In the early 2010s, there was this part one of a series called L5. And again, if somebody has more information on this, feel free to share. But as I remember what happened there, they filmed the first part. and then they were trying to sell the idea to Hollywood. I think Hollywood bought the script, but then buried it, so we never got a second part of L5, because L5 left us on a cliffhanger. And then sometime in the late teens, on Amazon, Molly and I were just searching around in 2018, 2019, something like that. And there was this thing called Nobility that had Walter Koenig in it and a few other people that I recognized. And it seemed like it was its own independent science fiction thing. You can't find that anymore, at least I can't. When you go to Amazon and try to look for that, it shows the entry for Nobility, but then it says unavailable. So I don't know what happened with that. And then there was this production called Space Command that Mr. Sci-Fi on YouTube, he got filmed, and I think he was trying to sell it to Hollywood. I don't know if anything ever became of that. So I think he released it on YouTube. Again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, but that was based on an earlier property, but I believe he got a proper license to make it, so it's not a fan film. It was actually a licensed thing under the Space Command franchise. So there are little things here and there that are original, but what I don't understand is why, with everybody having an iPhone, and I realize not everybody's creative, but it's also not a zero thing. There are some people out there that are creative. So why aren't they getting together to make grassroots productions? They're not fan films I'm asking for. I guess you could call them independent films if they're one-off. I'm asking more of like a web series. Why aren't they doing that anymore? I think in the 2000s, usually it was in like flash animation form, but they had web series here and there. I believe Sanctuary from the 2000s started out as a web series.
Yeah, the pilot for Sanctuary was a web-based thing. It's unfortunate because I really liked the feel of the web pilot, but they stripped out a lot of that when they actually did the rest of the series, which was a shame because it had a very film noir feeling to it. Kind of like a cyberpunk film noir. It was actually pretty cool, except it wasn't cyberpunk. It was more of a fantasy kind of supernatural creatures kind of punk. But I thought that was a really cool feeling. And they stripped out the whole film noir part when they actually made the television series.
And one of the reasons that I can think of that maybe this doesn't happen as often as I would think is in order to start the production, I mean, after you write the scripts and so forth, you have to meet in a common place and film it. And then I would argue after you film it, and again, I'm using film in quotation marks because I realize on digital media, you're not filming anything anymore. But then you could go to your separate parts of the world and go through post-processing and finish the production after it's recorded.
Well, one of the other issues is that the ones that we've mentioned so far, for the most part, have all been done by professionals. And I think when you're a professional, that brings in a different set of hazards. If you try to make something outside of Hollywood, I have a feeling that oftentimes that will be frowned upon, especially if it's not picked up by anybody, and then you try to do something independently to get it out there. I'm not sure that the studios that didn't want it are going to be all that happy with you.
The concern, I can understand that point. Do you risk being ostracized by Hollywood social circles as well as employment circles for making your own independent thing? And that's a good question. That's why I'm like, with, let's say, the Adobe suite, which you would use for post-production type stuff like Adobe Premiere or even Photoshop if you're doing like textures for any sort of CGI work. That's affordable for the normal human being. There's a subscription for it, but it's affordable. So that's what I'm not understanding. I mean, another thing I think maybe might be causing the lack of these things is in this age of the internet, people are hypercritical of the slightest thing. So somebody who's just learning the trade and they stick out an independent series, let's say, if it's not perfect, you'll get a bunch of people that just nitpick it to death to the point where I can see if the author of it, the creator of it, isn't thick-skinned, might see this as a mostly negative experience and not want to continue doing it.
Yeah, because that brings me up to the next point. Like you said, in this day and age, it wasn't the most recent iPhone, but it was one of the previous iterations. They were actually marketing that for a while as something that you could use to film your own movies on. So what happened with that? I know a lot of the Harry Potter fan fiction that I saw was done just by normal, we'll call them civilians, not professional actors. So that was good to see. And a lot of them were actually pretty high quality, well done, which good for them. Some others that I saw were not as good, but, they tried. And it's a shame that it kind of seems like part of what's going on is that I just don't think that people have the social circles anymore to get something like this going, like when we were kids. I hate to say this, but I think everybody's so isolated, even though we have social media that allegedly connects everybody, but they don't have a circle of friends, like actual in real life friends that they could get together and do something with.
There are still some schools that crank out film study students.
True.
So you would think there's a group of people there and they would want to have a project, because what I'm asking for, I still want to see fan films of existing properties. So if you have a love of that, of Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, you continue doing that.
Even Batman, that Nightwing one that we saw was pretty good.
Yeah, there was a couple of Batman ones that were good. But what I'm asking for is the fan films, the property owners can yank that away from you at any moment. So any little subworld you create that you think you're getting somewhere interesting, the property owners can just rip that away from you because you don't own the property. So what I'm thinking, what I would like to see is completely new franchises done by the same type of people that do fan films, so that we can start investing in these properties. Specifically, I'm looking for science fiction. Maybe a little bit of fantasy, but I'm mostly grounded in science fiction as far as what new franchises I want to see. And I don't even want like one-off independent films. I would like to see web series where you have 5-6 episodes in a season for a series. That's what I'm not seeing. It's hard for me to wrap my head around. I understand all the challenges that I laid out, the challenges, Molly, that you laid out. But even with those, it's still a non-zero number that get over those hurdles.
So where are they?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking.
So that's what I'm asking the audience here. Do you know of any original content web series that just regular old people have put together themselves? Not fan fiction, but original work. Because I don't know if there's a place where you can go and easily find that stuff. I mean, YouTube, their algorithm now sucks when it comes to searching for new things. Like, they don't want you to see it.
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel, and I think they're also their own separate thing, called Dust or Dust TV.
Oh, yeah, that.
And they curate science fiction independent films. So if you go to Dust on YouTube and you type Dust and you find the Dust channel, you'll see independent science fiction films. But as far as I can tell, there's no series there. And honestly, the films that they have there, I mean, they have a few good ones, but there's a lot of not good. In fact, I guess I need to be careful. There's a lot of stuff there that does not appeal to me. It just seems like they're more interested in looking cool than they are on actually trying to tell a story or to present an interesting topic.
And I'll just admit it, I'm more of a fantasy person than I am science fiction. The Dust channel, there were a few things on there that I found appealing, but for the most part, it really wasn't my thing. So if there was a fantasy equivalent, I would be like, hey, all right.
Well, a lot of that wasn't interesting for me. When they did a lot of these films, they were...
I'll just say it, they came across like they were pretentious to me.
They were pretentious, trying to look cool, versus actually presenting anything that's interesting. That's one of the reasons why Molly and I like watching the Asylum films. Because even though they're knockoffs of Hollywood blockbusters, they put their own spin on it, so it's not really a fan film. And in some of them films' case, they're interesting, and I wish that there would be like more of this. But growing up, because my family wasn't very well off financially, movies weren't a thing for me because I couldn't afford to go to the movies that often. However, TV, I watched a ton of, because back then that was over-the-air 3 network television, And I loved television. I think that's why I'm looking for a web series that I can follow in installments, but not made by Hollywood. So one could argue, well, Netflix is making a new series. Yeah, I tried to watch a lot of their stuff. We even watched that One Piece, based on that Japanese anime from the 2000s.
Yeah.
It's okay, but it still has the professional, scent to it, polish to it.
There's a veneer on it, yeah.
Where it still feels like it's made by professionals in the Hollywood-type industry.
As it should, because it is.
And I'm looking to see things made by regular people all over the world. The same type of people that make fan films, I would just like them to make their own original properties. Because I think there's a lot of us that would support your properties as a message to those who might be of the creative mindset. This is something that has, I don't know where this came from in our pop culture, this idea that people either come out awesome at doing something or they're not. Like they were destined to do this stuff. So a lot of people think, well, because I tried to do this and I made a bunch of mistakes, I must not be destined for this. That's not my experience in my profession that I did when I was younger and even currently dabble in now. I made a ton of mistakes. That's how you learn. That's how learning is done. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing it right. And even when you get good at something, you still make mistakes. It's just your mistakes are much, 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 much less than when you were younger and you were first trying to do it. So my advice to anybody young or just new, who knows, maybe you're in your 60s and you want to get into making independent science fiction web series, is get out there, make mistakes, have a thick skin. Hopefully there are people that aren't just saying you suck, but give you constructive criticism. Get better at your craft. That's how it works. That's how learning anything works, is you gotta suck it up, go out there. I'm trying to remember that exchange in that Rocky movie from the 2000 noughts, where Rocky was telling his son, if you think you know your worth, then go out there and get it. And if life knocks you down, you gotta get back up and keep going, because that's how winning is done. That's how getting good at any profession is. If you write a script for a new property, if that's your first script, it's probably going to be not very good, but you should still write it. And then hopefully get somebody to give you some constructive feedback. So when you try to write a second script, that second script will probably still not be very good. But I bet you if you learn from the constructive criticism, it'll be slightly less bad than the last time you did it. It's the same as if you are putting microphones on a studio and doing audio mixing. First time you do it, it's going to sound like crap, I guarantee you. But I bet you'll learn things from it, and the next time it'll be a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. So don't let pop culture tell you that because you don't come out of the gate perfect, you're just not destined to do this stuff, because that's not how these things work.
Well, I also want to add to that, don't let pop culture tell you that if you don't have the educational background or the degree that makes you or gives you the authority in some bullshit, that you can't do it. That's just crap. That is gatekeeping by the upper class, that if you don't have the credentials, you can't do something. Well, that. You know what? I want to hear the voice of the working class. I've heard enough from wealthy people to last me a lifetime. So you know what? I want to hear the voice of somebody who's driving a car that's 15 years old and held together with duct tape and bubble gum. That's what I want. I want somebody who knows what it's like to be driving around with your muffler all up to the point where the cops pull you over and tell you got to get it fixed. That's whose voice I want to hear now. I don't want to hear about people whining that they had to wait in line for the new iPhone. I know where they can shove their iPhone, and it's right up.
You don't need to go to film school to make good films. You don't need to go to school to be an audio mixer or a video editor. What you need is a drive, some talent, and the ability to learn from your mistakes and to also learn from people who know how to do this. And if you have that mindset, you don't need an education. You do not have to go through any sort of formal training to do this kind of stuff. I mean, if you want to, that's fine, but you don't need to. In fact, as Molly said, the way education is, at least in the United States, I'm assuming it's most of the Western world, it is becoming so expensive now that only well-to-do classed people, their children, are able to go to school and not work 50, 60, 70 hours a week and coming home dog-tired, because normal people who still are pursuing college have to take out so much student loan that when they graduate college, in a lot of cases, they need to hold down 2 or 3 jobs just to try to not only pay to just live, but then pay off their student loans. So don't think you have to go to school in order to do this. Don't think that you have to be perfect at it, that it's a destiny thing, that all these, I mean, even going back to like the J.J. Trek films, Molly and I were talking about this the other day. That's one of the reasons I do not like the J.J. Trek portrayal, is Captain Kirk in that film, he was a man of destiny. They kept saying he was a man of destiny. But in the original Star Trek, in TOS 1960s era, the character they portrayed was a very hard worker in school. There was that one episode where they described Kirk as like a pile of books with legs. I forget the exact quote. And Kirk made tons of mistakes in TOS, but he learned from those mistakes. And Kirk in TOS was a self-made person. And that's why the J.J. Trek films don't work for me. That Kirk, he was a loser. He was a screw-up, but he had this destiny to be something great. And that's why that film rubbed me the wrong way, because it reinforced the idea that you're destined to be good at a subject. Now, people do have talent. You can train as hard as you want, and you can get all the experience you want. And once you're at that level, then talent is what separates the really good from the average. But they all start at the bottom. They all start by making mistakes. And you should get used to making mistakes. I guess that's kind of what this video is about, is to pour out a request for the creatives out there. Start making stuff, not just fan films. Start making independent properties, because there is a large number of us that will jump ship off of these dead franchises like Doctor Who, Star Wars, and Star Trek, and we will jump onto your franchise as long as it feels like you're trying to learn and you're trying to put out something that's interesting, not just to look cool. If it's just a vanity project, a lot of us aren't going to take any interest in that. But if you're actually trying to get a message out there, trying to make a good science fiction web series, we'll jump on board, not only just with our interest, but we'll even go into crowdfunding, because I know I contributed to several fan films in the 2000 teens, and I have no regrets for that, because I got good products out of that. But what I'm asking is, I don't just want fan films. I would like independent franchises that I can invest my effort into, so that I can leave Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek, and say, no, in the 2020s, this is the new franchise. In 20 years, people will be making fan films of this web series.
Yeah, so if you already know of some that exist that YouTube just won't let us find, or it's somewhere else, somebody has created something that is their own, it's new, it's not fan fiction of something else. If there is such a thing that you know of that already exists, definitely let us know in the comments so we can check it out, because we all got a network at this point, because Google's making it really hard to find new things. They're only showing us what they want us to see, and this is a good way to fight against that. Just share information with each other.